Okay, I'm going to get started. Okay, lecture module 13, the last chapter in the textbook. Now, we've been talking about computer ethics throughout this course. We have to, necessarily. Recall from day one, I introduced the Business IT Society Triangle. And they're all connected, interrelated. Any change, new technology is going to affect changes in business. It's going to affect changes in society. Some good, some bad. And it's going to be up to us to assess these. And hopefully we can analyze and assess these before the technology comes out. But that's impossible. We know that. Okay, so the textbook is relatively straightforward. We're going to move through the textbook material pretty quickly. I'm not just going to simply regurgitate the information. And I'm going to introduce some new things from the textbook. One of the things that the textbook omits is really to present a foundation, because we're going to talk about, intellectual property, digital rights management, all of these things. But central to this, we have to understand the distinction, the difference between information, digital items, and physical items. So let's take a look at this. So I've wrote something up here. When we look at physical items, well, physical items wear out. Okay, we understand that. Replicated at the expense of the manufacturer. Now, it is possible to reverse engineer items. I could purchase a car. I could reverse engineer it. My ability to actually make another car based on that re-engineered, diagrams, it's probably impossible for me to do that. Now, in some areas, though, physical items now are able to be reproduced through digital analysis. When we look at 3D printing, and more specifically, a 3D scanner printer fax. So the ability for me to get an object, scan it, and at least a small object, and reproduce it actually is now possible. Physical items exist at a tangible location. We know that. And when sold, the seller no longer owns the thing. Great. Now, in contrast, information. Information never wears out, although it can become irrelevant, obsolete, outdated, whatever. Can be replicated at virtually no cost without limit. But again, we now understand these mechanisms because we're talking about resources. When I look at digital information, we're probably looking at a file, and whether that file is, a song, music, whether it's a movie, whether it's software. It is possible to make copies. Where can we stop the ability to make copies? Going back to, it's the operating system. Recall, the operating system is that resource manager. So if I want to inhibit a file from being copied, it must take place at the operating system level. We understand this. A couple mechanisms. When Napster first came out, the early 2000s, and people were sharing, ripping music and then sharing it without compensating the artist or the record company. Well, Sony Music decided to contract with a third party, and they outsourced it, to create a rootkit. You should know what a rootkit is based on our Linux studies. And they put this on their music CDs. So when you inserted a music CD from Sony, it would actually, the rootkit would modify your operating system to prevent the unauthorized copying of that music. Okay, great. Do they have permission to change my operating system? No, I didn't, and they didn't ask to be granted that permission. They just did it. And unfortunately, their third party that they contracted to make that rootkit, they didn't do their job well because it had vulnerabilities. So now, not only when I put the CD in my computer, am I prevented from copying the music, which is justifiable, but now you've introduced vulnerabilities into my computer, and some computers were hacked. So obviously, there's some major ethical and legal issues here. But we do need to understand, because we do now, the basis when we look at reproducing digital information, files, where can it be restricted? The operating system. Now, Apple kind of took a different track with iTunes. And I've talked about that previously as well. So information can be replicated virtually no cost, exists in the ether, not at a tangible location. And in contrast to physical items, when sold, the seller still retains the information. Okay. When we look at information, music, movies, software, the cost comes in producing it the first time, because then we can replicate it. It's very easy. So again, that's really in contrast to physical items. Much of the cost of reproducing physical items comes from the manufacturing. Okay, tomorrow I am going to speak about the ethics discussion board, which is a component of the final project. And I do want to remind everyone, all coursework must be submitted by next Wednesday, 9 p.m. The ethics discussion board is part of the final project. It's a third of it. The final project consists of the final project submission, the final project discussion board, and the ethics discussion board. And every semester, some students will omit one of those three components. So they're losing a third of 25 points, essentially 8 points. 8 points is significant off a final grade. You consider a great semester, 97 average. You lose those 8 points, you're now down in a B, okay? So hopefully that conveys the importance of this. So I will present that tomorrow. That is the ethics discussion board, but I'm going to talk about at least the ethical constructs, ethical theory here in just a minute. So in fact, I'll do that now. So is this in the discussion boards, ethics and professional conduct, which again is part of the final project. And I presented this previously, but just to refresh our memories, ethics theories. There are three different distinctions for business ethical theory: stockholder theory, stakeholder, and social contract. Stockholder. Stockholder theory states, essentially, all I care about is making money for my stockholders. As long as it's not illegal, I'm going to do it to make money for my stockholders. We're about to see a video on that. Stakeholder theory. Stakeholder theory, well, I'm concerned about my stockholders and their earnings, but I also want to take care of my stakeholders, whether it's just my employees or whether it's users of whatever my organization is doing. And lastly, social contract theory, which states that an organization strives to do more good than the resources it consumes. So stockholder, stakeholder, and social contract theory. I'm going to jump back. I'm going to show a video here. This was Stephen Colbert. I'm not going to say anything about his humor, but it does present something about what Target began, and many companies started doing right around 2010 or so. It's based on data. And of course, since 2012, we've had an explosion of dark data, right? I gave the example of Best Buy. Best Buy put cameras at the front of their stores, and they realized that when people walk into their Best Buy stores, they look right. So they moved all their expensive items to the right. So it was dark data, data that was previously undiscovered. And what's facilitating this discovery of all this dark data? Sensors, okay, the Internet of Things. But also combined with people's web movement around the webs, they're tracking. And it's being combined with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and predictive analytics. So I'm going to show again this video, 2012. And we must recognize that since 2012, AI has progressed immeasurably. Computer processing power has progressed. Earlier in the semester, and maybe next week I'll talk about AI in further detail, about NP complete problems, not polynomial algorithms that AI kind of relies on. And previously, we just didn't have the processing power. We have the processing power now for all of this machine learning and analytics. So without further ado, I did break it out. Hopefully I got rid of we'll bypass the ads. Nope, I'm not going to bypass the ads. So let's see. That, it's not just that we're being tracked, that we're being profiled, that all of this information is being collected on us. But then there's an intent to deceive to not let us know that this is occurring. And again, you and I, we're computer scientists, so we're aware of this. Is the average person? No. And it's gotten far worse. I mentioned this a week ago. In this October, in the US Senate hearings, big tech was on Capitol Hill. You know, they're being interrogated or questioned by Senate. And Zuckerberg revealed that Facebook has an internal app that they wrote to share with Google, and of course Google's YouTube, and Twitter. So they're collaborating to track us across the web. They're collaborating to show us the information they want us to see, and yes, even censor information they don't want us to see. So think about all of this taking place. Again, we have these ethical contexts: social contract, stakeholder, stockholder. And you can see, you know, what they may be applying here. I'm not going to, you know, give my opinion on what they're applying, but they're, you know, which one they're following. So we'll leave that up to you. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the textbook material at this point. And again, I'm not going to, you know, just read off what the textbook provides. The textbook gives a very straightforward presentation on this. And again, the one omission, they have a couple of omissions. We need to recognize just the distinction, the difference between physical items and information or digital items. So intellectual property rights. Rights that creators of original creator works are entitled, okay? Some of them are formal, copyrights, patents, trademarks, things of this nature. Some are not quite so formal. We'll take a look at that too. So there's considerable legislation. Of course, I just mentioned copyrights, patents, you know, trademarks. The textbook does not include trade secrets. I did include that. I'll introduce that in just a minute too. But beyond that, there are others: anti-cyber squatting, you know, Family Entertainment Copyright Act. Cyber squatting, if you're unfamiliar, is registering domain names that are very similar to established domain names. You know, I always use that ESPN.com example. So if I were to try to register, you know, EXPN, maybe someone would fat finger instead of hitting the S, they hit the X. And of course, if I could mirror that site, make it look like ESPN, maybe I could take advantage of some unsuspecting web traveler. Okay, so when it comes to protections, of course, there are legal protections. There are other things that the creators can use, digital watermarks. We see these in pictures quite often. You know, professional photographers, they want to be compensated for their work. So, but they'll publish it to the web as a marketing avenue, but they'll put a digital watermark there. So it can, you know, if you share it, of course, that digital watermark is going to, you know, obfuscate whatever, you know, the full reproduction. Digital rights management software, okay, DRM. Again, we understand the operating system is the resource manager. So if you want to protect any portion of digital information, it has to be done at the operating system in that protected mode. You know, you can do it with the operating system. You can do it as Apple does with the iTunes store, have everything come through that. They've tried, you know, with varying levels of success to embed the DRM into the files themselves, like movies, things like that. You know, you can digitally watermark a movie too, but you can put DRM software so it may not be able to be rendered properly. This is rife with problems because we have players, you know, QuickTime, VLC, all of these players, Windows Media. So you have to get everyone on board with that as well. So looking at the legal provisions. So copyrights are there, you know, of course, written works, music, movies, things like that. I often focus with these things on how long they last. Copyrights are very strong. Music industry, 70 years after the creator's death. That's pretty significant. Or for an organization, 120 years after the organization actually creates it, okay? Registered with the US Copyright Office. Trademarks, a little less formal. Again, just trying to prevent people from infringing on, say, your marketing, word, phrase, or symbol that identifies goods or services. As examples, we know eBay, the small e, the capital B, A-Y. I forget the color scheme they use, but it's a trademark. Will be denoted whether it's registered, okay, or not registered, the SM, okay, or TM. And then the registered, which is that little superscript R. These are all superscript that you'll see them. I spoke about typo squatting just a minute. Patents, are very strong, but only last for 20 years. And this is probably most conspicuously recognizable in the pharmaceutical industry, right? The pharmaceutical industries will come out with a new drug, charge high prices for it. And then 20 years after the fact, the patent will run out. We'll get all these generic drugs for pennies on the dollar. So patents do exist. And they can be used for processes. When I talk about processes, that would also include, algorithms, so computer software. What's not in the text is trade secrets, okay? And these are actually very important. They're not registered, okay? But they can be formulas, practices, processes, designs, instruments, etc. Not generally known to the public, have economic benefit, and the holder makes efforts to maintain secrecy. And I'm going to draw your attention to just something that occurred last week. A Chinese professor, okay, was accused, and I believe guilty, considering he pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, of compromising a trade secret with the Huawei company and actually the Chinese government. He was a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, working with, of course, chip fabrication. This is very serious. Now, he was not prosecuted on stealing a trade secret. He pled guilty to a lesser charge, and he was allowed to leave the country. And this is important. We can't read too much into it about being allowed to leave the country. There are things going on internationally. And we're treading carefully. Okay, last thing we want is a war or to, make matters worse in international relations. So this occurred. Okay. So ethics. Again, there are different distinctions of ethics. There are personal ethics. There are business ethics. Stockholder, stakeholder, social contract theory, computer ethics, and we'll have to make personal decisions over the course of our professional careers. You look at a company, Target, and what I just demonstrated what they're doing, or what the New York Times actually showed, and Colbert revealed, and you'll have to make decisions. Are your personal ethics in accord with the company you're working for? We don't know that. And again, as long as you're consistent with your ethics, I believe in stockholder theory. Make money for the stockholders, as long as it's not illegal, who cares? And that's valid. It's entirely valid. And know that going into the ethics discussion board. I will never, ever grade you on your ethical perspective, okay? You believe in social contract theory? Fine. You believe in stockholder theory? Fine. That's fine, okay? But we'll have to make these decisions over the course of our professional careers. Now, I will state something on computer ethics and really, computer use policies. I've revealed, I was a department chair for this department for 19 years. And I would receive hundreds and hundreds of resumes. It's easy to do these days with Indeed, things like that. I could put out my resume, my CV, to every college in the country, and people are doing this. So you have no idea with the resume that you're receiving, from Ohio, from California, from wherever, do they really want to work at Hudson Valley, or are they just looking for a job? Because as department chair, I always sought faculty who were invested in the college, who were invested in the community, invested in the students' needs, the community students. And we may find someone from Indiana that holds those ideals, but we may not. One of the questions I would always pose them is, have you reviewed our computer use policy? Maybe ask them about a certain point in it, because I'd determine if they were really invested, if they were really interested in coming to work for the Hudson Valley. And if you're unaware, I run the internship program for the CISS department here. And I always have the students, prospective interns, read the computer use policy. And this is something you should do for every job you apply to. You never know. Okay, one, it shows that you want to be invested in the company, but also you never know during the interview if you're going to get a question that may allow you to distinguish yourself from the other candidates. So it's one thing I always highly recommend. In internship, I actually require it. You have to read the computer use policy. Hopefully it creates a good, lasting behavior. Ethical use, we know about it, in copyrighted material, especially with books. When it comes to academics, we talk about academic dishonesty, plagiarism, including sentences or a paragraph or something that you didn't write, using code you found on the internet. But I also want to strongly reinforce the good properties of academic integrity or academic honesty, properly citing sources. In the course of our academic careers, research careers, professional careers, we'll have the opportunity to advance the discipline. But we have to recognize that we're standing on the shoulders of the people that came before us. And that's what actually properly citing works, citing materials does. One researcher concluded this, another researcher concluded this. Well, I'm going to combine them. And I can do that because this was proper and this was proper, these two conclusions, so it allows me to extend the academic integrity. So I don't always look at, academic dishonesty, honesty from strictly a negative perspective. I always look at the positive. It allows us to further the discipline. When it comes to dishonesty though, don't do it. Increasingly, unfortunately, this occurred this semester as well. We did identify a CISS 100 student who tried to contract with a tutoring agency to complete the FUNA project for them. So don't do this, please. We found this in programming classes too. So this is kind of a new emergent problem that higher education faces. Music. Many of us, not me, are too young to, we didn't live through Napster. Napster was an interesting time in the music industry. And I think I've told you, I play saxophone. I'm actually a professional musician. And music was just being burned and, ripped from CD and shared. By the way, you could always share my music. Not much value there. But Napster, of course, was based on peer-to-peer, which is torrents. Torrents are still available. Following Napster, anyone who used a torrent was seen as a pirate. And that's not the case. There are good applications for peer-to-peer networking, for torrents, for sharing, non-copyrighted material. So just because someone uses a torrent does not mean that they're involved in illegal activities. Ebooks. What do I want to say about ebooks? Again, they're being pirated. Okay, we recognize that. But many people, I think we're all New York State residents. If you are a New York State resident, I don't know if you knew this, you can register for a New York City public library card. I do recommend this. There's an application online. You'll have to submit, form of ID, your, photocopies of your driver's license. But New York City public library is phenomenal. It's huge, absolutely huge. You can request books. They'll send them to you by mail. They also have ebooks or digital books too, audio books, as good as Audible. It's just a great resource. And as you move forward with your academic careers, it's just nice having that resource, that free resource. So I do recommend, and if you move out of state, they've never asked me to update my library card. Now, of course, I'm still a New York State resident. So I don't know how long it would continue, but just know that, I guess. Put that in your information repository. Okay, digital rights management. We understand, again, that if I'm going to inhibit or prevent the copying of digital information, it must occur at the operating system level. I won't say anything beyond that. Again, I spoke about computer use policies. Again, I require it for the internship wherever you're placed. But again, it is one of the best things you can do in preparing for an interview. It can actually reveal, to some extent, the culture of the organization. I haven't spoken much about organizational culture. And coming up in one of the upcoming slides is ethics varies according to culture. But let me introduce this first from an organizational perspective. There are two types of cultures, two broad categories: individualistic cultures and collectivistic. Individualistic, like the United States, individuals are really concerned with and responsible for their own welfare. In collectivistic societies, a lot of the Asian societies are collectivistic, they put the state, the country, above their individual concerns. So we look at cultural ethics norms, Here, we're very aware of digital rights management, things like that. Other cultures may not treat it with the same perspective. They may feel it's permissible to, copy software if it's going to help their country, okay? And there are instances, I won't cite the specific countries, but that's out there. And it becomes very problematic going back to systems analysis and design when we're outsourcing work overseas, because necessarily I probably have to reveal some proprietary information to my outsourced individuals overseas. And they may see nothing wrong ethically in accord with their cultural ethics of sharing this information within their community and possibly their government. So we need to recognize this. Okay, ethical use of employee and customer information. Well, we just saw that Target video. And again, we recognize what was just revealed on US Senate investigations with Facebook, Google, YouTube, and Twitter. Now, I think there's going to be some antitrust action taken there. But the damage is already done. They've done their profiling. They've collected their information. So cheating and falsifying information, well, we know about that, in the academic world, okay? But it does go beyond that in your professional careers, resume padding. And this happens, and I don't have any figures for this. I would imagine it occurs more in IT than other areas. Our resumes are rather distinct from other areas because it's actually recognized and even proper to include on our resumes, well, I'm familiar with these operating systems, these systems. I am conversant and knowledgeable of these programming languages. So it's very, unfortunately, common for IT professionals. They have padded their resumes with operating systems, programming languages, things like that, that they really may not be, up to snuff on. So please don't do this. I recommend you don't do this. It'll avoid some uncomfortable situations in the future when you're asked, oh, yeah, we understand you understand this language. Here, I'm giving you a project to program it. So don't set yourself up that way. Hoaxes. We are living in an interesting times, with the pandemic, with the lockdown, forcing everyone into an online world. Recall what I said about computer security and privacy. Security is 75% policy. I gave the example, if I never choose to connect my computer to the internet, it's pretty secure. Okay. But we have a trust network as well. Okay, so I have great security policies for my computer. Can I vouch for everyone I communicate with? No. So I don't open up attachments from nearly anyone. Why? Because who knows about their security policies, and they may be duped. And what has happened with the pandemic, the lockdown, forcing everyone into online work? We've forced everyone into an online world where you and I, yes, we know what to do, how to secure our systems, what policies we need to put in place. But think, we've just forced the entire population online, and they are not prepared largely to defend themselves, to understand this is phishing, schmishing, this is a hoax, okay? People are being duped right and left. And God forbid, they get duped and they send me something and my system gets compromised. So it's just become a very dangerous time in the online world. Digital manipulation, this too has become troubling, more troubling. In the past it was image manipulation. You can manipulate, movies, things like that. Fine. But with the evolution of AI into digital manipulation, it is now possible to take someone's image, make it appear as if they're saying something they're not, put them in a geographic place they never were in. This is taking place as well. Next week, I'll probably show something on marketing and combining of images. This is taking place in marketing as we speak. So it's possible to mine images of, say, your friends and create a composite. And the marketing will be, sent to you. And you won't be able to tell it was your friends, but there'll be something about it that's familiar that may compel you to trust the marketing. So we'll look at that next week as well. So recall what I said day one, or even to begin today's presentation, business IT society. IT will have some emergent technology or the convergence. I often, speak about the convergence of the cell phone and the camera, just because we're all aware of it. And great, allowed us to do a lot of things, but then people began to abuse it almost immediately, taking pictures in kids' playgrounds and locker rooms, things of this nature. There's always going to be a lag between the emergence of some technology or the ability to do something through technology and the legislation that prevents or at least tries to limit its abuse. So that business IT society triangle. So some of us are familiar with what occurred in the financial world, the late 1990s and early 2000s. And legislation did come out to prevent that from happening again. But again, it continues to happen. Censoring and misinformation, well, we're living through it right now. Workplace monitoring, even this has evolved. Again, we've pushed everyone into this online environment. And employers have, permission, it's recognized, to monitor, evaluate their employees. So it's kind of different though when they're at home. So we'll have to watch what occurs here. Cultural ethics, I did present this. Again, they vary. We need to be very aware of this. It's very difficult. I don't understand the cultural ethics of a lot of foreign countries. So I have to be very wary, and I have to do my due diligence when I do outsource to these countries for work. And this is where I got to in the last two classes, so I'm going to stop here. There's some things going on here, but I'll talk about this tomorrow, and I'll talk further about the ethics discussion board as well. So that's all I have for today, so thank you very much, and I'll see you all tomorrow. See ya.
I actually had a couple questions I had for you.
Okay, yes, definitely.